Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the Pacific Coast Archaeological Society's May 9th meeting. And tonight we have the pleasure of Dr. Patrick O'Grady from the University of Oregon. The title of his talk tonight is Evidence for 18,000-Year-Old Human Occupation at Rimrock Shelter, Harney County, Oregon. Dr. Pat O'Grady earned his BS, MS, and PhD from the University of Oregon and worked for their Museum of Natural and Cultural History from 2005 until 2023. Before that, he worked for the Oregon Department of Transportation as a highway archaeologist. He is currently the district archaeologist and tribal liaison for the Burns District Bureau of Land Management in southeastern Oregon, where much of his research has been centered. Dr. O'Grady's focus over the years has been on hunter-gatherer adaptations, Paleoamerican archaeology, geophysical field applications, and zoo archaeology, including the development of a substantial comparative osteological collection for the University of Oregon. Unfortunately, his video is not working, that we can see his face, but we'll be able to hear him. And I'd like to turn the meeting over to Dr. O'Grady. Thank you so much for joining the PCAS in this lecture. Appreciate it. I'm going to turn myself to mute. Welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Stephen. It's really a pleasure to be here talking to you all tonight. And can you see the screen of the PowerPoint screen right now, everyone?
No, we cannot.
Okay.
Share the screen.
Let's see. We had it up a little while ago, but for some reason, oh boy.
It worked for the test.
Yes, it did. This seems to happen in an inordinate amount of time here lately, so I'm not sure how to get back to the main screen for PowerPoint, or for the Zoom. I'm a little stymied here, folks. Okay, launch meeting. Let's try this over. Open Zoom meeting. Okay, now we're back.
You've got it now.
Okay.
I also could see it.
And if you can make it full screen, there you go.
Okay, I think we're rolling. Now let's try another slide. Okay, we can go forward. Okay, let's get started here. So as was mentioned, I am the BLM archaeologist at the Burns District Bureau of Land Management, where I started in November of 2023 and just passed my 6-month anniversary. So I'm settling into the work there. I have been working for the past since 2009. We've been working at the Rimrock Draw Rockshelter in the northern part of Harney County, in the same general area in the Burns District BLM. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is the work that we have been doing at Rimrock Draw Rockshelter, and I have broken the presentation into 5 parts. And so they're all very elemental parts, and each one is separated by titles such as water and wind, dirt, plants and animals, and radiocarbon dates and things like that. So broken into real basic blocks so that we can just kind of keep the focus on all of the elements that fit to tell us something about the site that we've been at in that area of the Burns District. So in this photograph here, you can see Rimrock Draw Rockshelter as a basalt wall over on the left side of the screen. And can you see my cursor here on my mouse if I move it around?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, so I'll use that from time to time. But so the rock shelter is over here against this wall. It's a very small, very modest and shallow rock shelter. That wall is only about 20 meters long, and at the deepest, it goes back in about 3 meters, maybe up to 4. So it's more of a windbreak really than a classic rock shelter in the sense of the northern Great Basin site like Paisley Caves or Roaring Springs Cave, or places like that that are deep and substantial and have dry deposits. This is a place that has been subjected to repeated wetting and drying over many thousands of years, and so we don't have the same kind of preservation as what we expect to see at those other locations. Where you can see my shadow here in this picture, it's changed a lot since we've done a tremendous amount of archaeology work and some trenching there. But there's a stream channel that goes by the rock shelter that comes in from this direction, and it curves off this way and goes off in the distance. That stream channel is the main reason that the site exists, and that stream stopped being used about 7,000 years ago or somewhere in that region. So here's where the site is located. You can see that tannish brown area in the lower right corner of the state of Oregon is arid country. It's a section of the Great Basin of the Intermontane North America. We're up there on the very northern edge of the Great Basin, and all of those streams and channels that flow in along the entire extent of the Great Basin flow towards its center, towards base level. So it's internally draining. We don't have external drainage, and it's on the rain shadow side of the Cascade Mountains over this direction. So rain hits the western edge of the Cascades and drops off. And so when it comes over onto this side, the precipitation is greatly reduced, at least at this time, and we have very arid sagebrush steppe conditions. This is what the rock shelter looks like when we first found it in 2009. At that time, we were working at a site down the road from this called Sheep Mountain Clovis site. And so Scott Thomas, who was then the district archaeologist for the BLM, was coming back and forth and delivering things to us as we were working down at that other site. And he kept looking off in the distance and seeing a thin fold in the basalt along the off in the distance. I'll catch my words here in a minute. But so he kept seeing this spot off in the distance, and he decided one day to step out of his truck and go and have a look. And when he walked up to the site, he was impressed, first of all, by the fact that there was a tremendous amount of obsidian, stone tools, and chipping debris in a radius of about 300 meters around this point right here, this little fold in the ground. And so Scott walked up and he saw all these chips and stone tools, and he noticed that when he got down into the area where the rock wall is, there was a bare surface, and there was nothing on it except a single stem point made between about 7 and approximately 15,000 years ago, based on recent archaeological work. He found that stem point on the surface and noticed that there was nothing else around it. And he was really impressed by that because the suggestion was that there was a buried context there. The archaeological material had not been brought up to the surface to any great extent by either animals or by artifact collectors and looters. And so that was very exciting. He also noticed that the sagebrush was about anywhere from 6 to 8 feet in front of the rock shelter. And when you get sagebrush that's that dense and that high in what's mostly erosional territory, that means that there's deep buried deposits and there's some moisture there to allow those plants to grow to that sort of dimension. So there were a variety of things that caught his attention, but the main things were that he saw no real evidence of archaeology on the surface except for that stem point. But there was, on the erosional surfaces, there were tens and tens of thousands of tools and chipping debris scattered all the way around it. So when Scott came down and got me at Sheep Mountain, we came back and had a look at this site and decided that we were going to test it to see how deep it was, because in the northern Great Basin, finding a site in open country that has deeply buried deposits is just incredibly rare. And so we were both excited about this, and so that was in 2009. We continued to work at Sheep Mountain over the next 2 years. And between 2010 and 2011, we had surveys, pedestrian surveys by volunteers from the Oregon Archaeological Society out at the site. They walked the entire surface back and forth, a very close order sort of survey transects, and kept finding primarily stem points dating between that 7 and 15,000 year time range on the surface. They found a few northern side notches that date a little from 7,500 to a little later, and they didn't find any of the stone tools, the diagnostic projectile points that we find so commonly throughout the rest of the Great Basin. Those are Elko, Gate Cliff, the smaller arrow points like Rose Springs and East Gates and Desert Side Notch, etc. So the archaeology was telling us that we had an old site there based on the surveys. So after 2 seasons of the Oregon Archaeological Society coming out there and doing surveys, we decided that we need to really get in there and do some excavation. So after a 6-week field school in 2000, or I'm sorry, after the 2011 work at Sheep Mountain, we came back and did 2 weeks of excavation right here where this photograph is at the rock shelter. And in the course of 2 weeks, we got down 150 centimeters below the surface and started finding stratigraphically defined deposits in there, which was very exciting because not only do we have deep deposits, but it looked like they had some stratigraphic order to them. So then I decided to come back and do a archaeology field school for the University of Oregon. And we worked there more than 8 seasons from 2012 until 2023. And we have put now a total of 58 weeks of excavation and research archaeology in at Rimrock Draw Rockshelter. So here's what it looked like when we were out there working in 2016. You can't see it real well in this picture because of the shadow of the rock wall, but it does tell you to some degree how inset the back of the rock shelter is from the front. And then you can see some evidence of our excavation pits, and then you see those many thousands of sandbags. The sandbags are filled with the sediment that we excavated from the rock shelter, passed through screens to extract chipping debris, stone tools, bones, all of the variety of things that archaeologists look for in the course of excavation. Then we use that screen dirt to fill those sandbags and put them back in the units at the end of the field season. So over the course of the work that we've done out there, we've filled about, I'd say probably close to 10,000 sandbags now with material that we've taken out of the excavation blocks. So I want to jump right in first thing with the radiocarbon dates that we've been getting from the rock shelter. And I want to use these as a device to talk about some significant changes that we see in the deposition at the site from top to bottom. So up at the top of the list, you have multiple dates in black text. And the first one is the conventional radiocarbon date. And the second one is the calibrated radiocarbon date. So you'll see that I'm going to talk mainly in calibrated dates just for ease of explaining the true significance of the site, but I like to include the conventional dates as well. So up at the top, you can see that we have a series of dates on plants and also on sediments that have come out of the excavation units and out of the trenches. And these dates are all in the range of about 4,500 years to about 10,000 years in age. So up top, those are mostly plant dates, some sediment dates. They go down to about 10,000 years in age, and they are separated from the older and deeper dates that we have on the site by a layer of rockfall from when portion of the wall of the rock shelter collapsed in and covered an ancient protected surface, So the dates underneath that rockfall are all on Pleistocene animal tooth remains that include bison and camel. And those dates range from 13,000 calendar years to 18,000 calendar years. So from bison teeth, we have tooth enamel that's in the 13,000 to 17,000 year range. Some goes into the 18,000 year time range. And then we have camel teeth fragments that have been radiocarbon dated in the 18,000 year time range. And these are all objects that have been associated with mixing of deposits with stone tools and chipping debris from their manufacture. So just think about this as I talk about the rest. We have dates down to 10,000. We have a layer of rockfall that has protected an ancient surface where we're getting dates in the 13,000 to 18,000 year time range. So the questions we were asking on a real basic level when we worked at the site is, how did people use it? How old is it? Is it a site where we have erosional or depositional effects on the deposits? And that's the key thing, is we can have a variety of old objects there that we can get dates on, but are the dates true to the deposits that we're finding them in? And then what is the paleoenvironmental context for the site? Down below that is a series of dates that have something to do with the site, and I'm not going to get into those too much except to point out that the earliest dates on camel tooth enamel from the site go back into the earliest period of the thawing of the glacial ice sheets at about 18,000 years ago, and the Pleistocene extends to 12,000, roughly speaking. We have some evidence of stem point technology that dates, I use 13,000 here, but we know that date is closer to 15. So we have stem point technology in the 15 to 7,000 year time range. And we have northern side notch points in the 7,500 to 4,000 year time range. Clovis technology, we have some evidence of Clovis technology at this site, but we don't have a single diagnostic Clovis point. So we can't really say that Clovis is a part of the site in honest terms, but we do know that the site predates and postdates Clovis period. So let's talk about the primary processes affecting the site, and that is water and wind. So in this photograph here, there's a thin wavy line that indicates the edge of the top of the rock shelter. If you go past that point, not paying attention, you're going to get hurt because you'll fall off the top and down to the dry stream channel below. So the top of the rock shelter is there. The stream channel, you can see by that faint change in the vegetation. It's a little, it doesn't grow quite as high down in the stream channel as it does on the terraces surrounding it. And you can make out that stream channel. So we know that at the time the site was used, there was a lot of water passing by in front of it. And that was probably the primary reason the site was occupied in the earliest times. Why would people want to live in a desert like this? Well, Tom Stafford has been a big part of our work out at Rimrock Draw, and he came out to help with sedimentary sampling and stratigraphic profiling of the site, and also to collect samples specifically for his use in radiocarbon dating. Stafford took notes on his hand every day when he would explain things to people, my students in particular. He would draw out the picture on his hand, and so I would try and take a picture of his hand as often as possible to add to my own notes at the end of the day. But Tom worked out there quite a bit, and he had some very specific ideas about what was happening out there at the rock shelter based on some work in the excavation units and in a trench that we dug bisecting the stream channel I just pointed out. So here Tom is sitting in one of our big trenches with Jordan Pratt, who is a PhD student currently at the Texas A&M University. And what he's pointing out here is a discrete divide between some marsh deposits deeper in the rock shelter, or in the trench adjacent to the rock shelter, and then windblown sediments up above. So Tom divided this from bottom to top in a three-part sequence. He sees that the first real evidence of water coming through in front of the rock shelter is a high energy stream channel that's carrying boulders, cobbles, and gravel from flood events and stream transport. Following that, as that stream channel reduced in velocity and energy, we see that there's more limited water coming into the area in front of the rock shelter, and there's evidence of a cienega. That marsh clay that you see down underneath that stratigraphic separation is very distinct. It's a dense black prismatic marsh clay, and very rich, and that's where we find the primary evidence of site uses in association with sediments from that cienega or marsh deposit. And then up above that, we have a very fine lens of Mount Mazama volcanic ash that is from the eruption that formed Crater Lake 7,700 years ago. And then we see reworked Mazama ash above that, which is kind of, it's not real clear in this picture, but this crack right here in the sediments shows where that volcanic tephra from Mount Mazama is present, and then the windblown sediments up above it. So you have this marsh clay down here. You have Mazama ash from the climactic eruption 7,700 years ago, and then reworked Mazama up to this point, and then you have windblown sediment all the way up to the top surface that we see today. So it's wind and water affecting the deposits at the site, or influencing the deposits at Rimrock Draw Rockshelter. So the stream channel, these are some boulders that came popping out of the stream channel when we put in our big trench. And you can see there's a lot of rounding of the edges of those, indicating that there's been some stream transport or stream borne sediment erosion. So we have boulders, cobbles, gravels, and sands accumulated before 13,000 years ago, and then the data on the stream channel is by a bison tooth that was resting at the bottom of the channel after a big pulse of energy pushed a lot of the sediment in and then filled it back in again. Here's a picture of what a cienega or a quiet water, slow stream channel might have looked like in that location back in that time. A really good place to get a variety of plant and animal resources for general use. And then one of the things that we noted when we were working on the trench on the north side of the stream channel opposite where the rock shelter is there's dark clay sediments that are starting up at a higher elevation on that side of the stream channel than where the actual stream channel is. That suggested there was water flow coming in from perhaps a spring that was located up on the terrace and working its way down, contributing water to the cienega setting there. So the artifacts that left in this picture came from the trench when we were digging next to that stream terrace. And then this is a piece of bison tooth enamel with some dentin on the interior. So I have a steep edge scraper, a foliate point, and then a very large Parman style of a stem point. When we were working there in 2021, at the very last day of excavation, one of the students popped up an obsidian scraper at the same level where we were seeing those dark clay deposits, and water started seeping into the footprint left behind by the removal of that stone tool, suggesting that there was still some water being produced somewhere buried in those deposits. And this was on the worst drought year of the entire last 5 years at Rimrock Draw Rockshelter. So we were really surprised to see that water, but it did suggest that the spring theory might have been really might really have some weight to it. And so this picture just kind of, you can't really see too much, unfortunately, but this shows where we're starting to see that seep coming through from very dry deposits. And you can see the Mazama ash here in the going across here, and you can see the marsh clays here. And they're all tilted from, in this picture, going downslope from right to left. So where was all the water coming from? To get that kind of stream velocity going down in the channel past the front of the rock shelter, we would anticipate that there had to be a substantial body of water up above where the rock shelter is located. So in the course of 2020, during the pandemic, when I couldn't have a field school or any students out there to work with me, I started walking all the stream channels going in towards Rimrock Lake, Hay Lake, and Wheatgrass Lake, which are the three large playas out there on the landscape today. So I was looking for evidence of shorelines or evidence of some sort of a higher stand of water in the area around these three lakes, and trying to map that on topographically on current topographic maps. You could see that there is a elevation that would allow this whole area to be filled in all the way around to a place where there's an outlet coming out between Juniper Ridge and a low ridge that is still in position today. So there would have been a single outlet for this entire lake area that would have flowed down past Rimrock Draw Rockshelter and out in the distance towards Silver Creek and Malheur Lake and Harney Lake, that are the big central lakes of the basin today. Work on the playa at Rimrock Lake by Joe Collins, who was a student at oh boy, El Paso, University of El Paso. Joe's work, he did coring of the bottom of the lake at Rimrock Lake and got a date of 18,310 cal BP. At Hay Lake, he did coring and got a bottom date of 19,260 that shows that water would have been present at this location in the 19,000 year time range at the time that Rimrock Draw Rockshelter was being used at the earliest. So water and wind have had its influence, and the main thing that we can say about that is that there was a heavy stream flow going past the rock shelter very early on. That was replaced by a shallow marsh that was primarily what we think was the most popular reason to have occupied that site between about 13,000 and 7,000 years ago. And then at about 7,000 years ago, something happened to the hydrology of the entire system, and we see nothing but windblown sands and silts coming in to the location. So the dirt I'm talking about now has to do with that, but it also has to do with the interior of the rock shelter. So just going back over what we just looked at, down at the bottom here, we have bedrock on this big trench. We have bedrock here. Then we have boulders and gravel from stream transport roughly below this white line. We have the marsh clays right here that are above the stream flow gravels. And then we have Mazama ash here. And then everything above it is windblown sands and sediments. There's no evidence of a hydrologic channel that cuts through those deposits after the Mazama. So it looks like it's a pretty consistent long-term cycle that occurred there of aridity. Here's that Mazama ash. We took a sample out of the area right in front in this photo. But you can see that Mazama ash is on top of this really dark marsh clay, this prismatic stuff. And you can see that there's a bead of ash from the climactic eruption of Mazama that is present here as a white line sitting right on top of that marsh clay. This material up above is all redeposited volcanic ash from Mazama that's blown in from the adjacent landscape and from the playas surrounding it. The wind is blowing from the southwest. The rock shelter wall is north facing. And so the wind has been a constant source of sediment since the aridity of the basin occurred. And so the ash blew in, and then after that, wind and windblown silts and sands carrying more tephra came in on top of that. We sent some of this ash off to Nick Foyd at Washington State University, and he identified it as a very clean sample of Mazama ash with a similarity coefficient of 0.98. This photo isn't my favorite, but it does show in another trench further downstream from the original one adjacent to the rock shelter. You can see the same thing. Here are these stream gravels, kind of orangish red oxidized material atop of bedrock. Here is the marsh clay. Here's the Mazama ash. Here's the rework stuff, and then here's the windblown sediment. These bands are very similar to the ones closer to the rock shelter. They're just thinner and more dispersed because you're further downstream away from the rock shelter. And then this is where we took the radiocarbon samples that were dated. So this is Tom Stafford's photograph of the trench deposits and showing the same things I've been talking about. This is a schematic of the profile that he made, but these dates are so great because the first one up at the top, right below where the Mazama ash is 7,670 radiocarbon years, or 7,662 calibrated years. And we know Mazama erupted at about 7,700. The dates go down. This shows a fairly consistent date of in the 7,300 range in the middle of the Cienega deposits, or 8,000 year range, and these dates show that the sediments are 13,000 years at the bottom of the Cienega deposits and into the stream gravels. So we've got some consistency there across the site in terms of the major packages of sediments that are reflected in the deposition at the site, from the rock shelter all the way downstream, a considerable distance in a series of trenches. So this is on the inside of the rock shelter. This is from Unit 2, where we've gotten a lot of really important information about the site. This is right up against the back of the rock shelter on the east side. And so you can see again here, this is surface. These are all windblown sediments. This is where you're getting into the marsh clay. It's diffused. It looks a little different here because there's been foot traffic here. You see the same kinds of sediments and very similar deposits, but they are muffled by the fact that people occupied this area and lived in it. The important thing that this really points out, aside from the fact that you have stream sediments, fine stream sediments down to bedrock over here, but this shows in profile the rocks that have accumulated as the course of the collapse of the rock shelter in early times. Remember, as I talked before, that we have dates in the 10,000 year range above the rocks, and down below we have dates in the 13,000 to 18,000 year time range. I wanted to point out this map in particular. This is a schematic map of all of the excavation units that we've dug at the site. The things that I want to point out more so than any place else is Unit 2 and Unit 30, which are adjacent to each other on the east side of the rock shelter. This is Unit 19. These two 1 by 1 meter quads right here are Unit 19. And Unit 18 is a 1 by 2 that goes behind Unit 19 into the back of the rock shelter right here. So this is what the rock shelter looks like at the floor as we've mapped it in at the ground surface before we started excavation. And then this dashed line is the approximate drip line for the rock shelter roof. So now let's talk about what we're finding in the rock shelter and in the area surrounding it. We have a variety of diagnostic artifacts that are coming from the site in general. And the thing that really stands out is when you look at the sedimentary deposits here, the stratigraphic layers, and we know that the Mazama ash sits right on top of the marsh clays, and it hasn't been truncated by later stream channel development. We can see that in terms of artifacts that we found both in the rock shelter and on the surface, we have a total of 9. It's closer to 12 now, but we have a total of 12 diagnostic stone tools that were made after 6,500 years ago. That's about the time that Elko points were being made. And there's just a few of those in here. There's one here. This is an Elko point here. So we have very few Elko. We have a couple of Gate Cliff. We have some East Gate and Rose Springs from the bow and arrow time period. A total of 12 maximum, and those are the only diagnostic stone tools we have made after about 6,500 years ago at the site. When we look at the stone tools before that time period, we have northern side notch that are made between 7,500 years and 4,000 years ago. We have cascade points, just one. We have 75 stem points and bases that include, 75 aside from the couple of wind dust points, the 4 Hasket points, the 2 black rock concave base, 3 crescents, and some fluted bifaces. 40 overshot artifacts that are consistent with Clovis technology or some stem point technology. So we have more than 100 tools, closer to 150 tools that are associated with use before 6,500 years ago. So the distinction here is pretty clear just on the diagnostics alone. Something happened around 70 or 7,000 years ago that people stopped coming to the site because we have so few artifacts after that time. And we have so many that predate that time. Although northern Sinaj goes 7,000 to 4,000 years in age, we know, or 7,500 to 4,000. We know that that had to be on the earlier side of the scale because Elko points, which are found almost everywhere, they're one of the most common stone tools found throughout the Great Basin. There's practically non-existent at this site. So the Elko points indicate that hardly anybody came to this place. The lack of Elko points indicate that hardly anybody came to this place after 7,000 years ago. And Glass Buttes, which is one of the biggest and most high quality obsidian sources, is only about 10 miles from this site. So if there was a reason to camp at this site during Elko times, people would have been there. Here's some of the stem points that we see. Most of them are broken bases. So we think that people were coming to the site carrying atlatl points, spears, that they had collected after throwing them at something and breaking off the tips. They carried them to the site and dropped the broken ones and replaced them with new points. This is a big cascade point. This is a huge hasket blade that's broken across the midsection here. But these are all stone tools that are associated with Western stem technology, dating between about 7,000 and 15,000 years in age. Here's some more. These are variations on the theme. So this is a black rock concave base point here. These are wind dust points. These are some square base stem points. There's just quite a few different kinds and expressions of that stem point technology at this site. We see stone tools with specialized uses at the site, and they include some very high quality cryptocrystalline silicate, chert, jasper, chalcedony stone tools that have specialized purposes, like perforating tip on this one. We have engraving spurs on some of these, sometimes multiples, convex edge scrapers on both sides of this one. This one has multiple engraving spurs across one side. It has another engraving spur over here. It has a concave scraper here, a convex scraper over here. And we've seen a couple of these from the site, and these are very distinctive. This has an engraving tip right here. It has another engraving tip here. It has a concave scraper here, a convex scraper here, and then it has a steep edge scraper right here. So these, to me, these are very interesting stone tools, and they're more exciting than projectile points are, because they indicate a specialized use at the site that's different from just somebody coming through and dropping broken points from a hunting trip. So, that's really simplifying the story, but these tell a whole different part of what was going on at the rock shelter. And most of these are being found underneath the rock layer from the wall collapse that occurred before 10,000 years ago. Another piece that we found that's gotten a lot of press is this chalcedony stone tool. This is a translucent orange chalcedony, or an agate-like stone. Agate is banded and chalcedony is not. And this one, the locals in the area call this orange peel agate. because of that orange rind, but it's not seen in Harney County. It's seen at rock shows in the Ochocos up in Prineville and Redmond. We see some of this show up in those places. But this one is very important because it was found in the deepest deposits at the site. Let's see, I'm going to go into that a little bit more in just a little while. So I'll show you that now and then get to it later. The other thing we're seeing at the site infrequently, but both in buried contexts and also in surface deposits, are crescents. And crescents are really enigmatic. There's a couple of really major ideas about what they were used for. But the thing that is really distinctive about them is that when we see them outside of the Channel Islands and places down in Southern California, in the Great Basin, we see these associated specifically with shallow water marshes or shallow water lakes. And so their purpose is tied archaeologically to shallow lake settings, and we have them here at the rock shelter, which suggests that the idea that there was a big lake adjacent to the rock shelter at one time in the past is not far-fetched. So both of these are complete crescents from the site, and these two here were found in a buried context, which is really uncommon anywhere in the northern Great Basin. So I heard some talk about Edward's chert a little while ago. One of the things that was brought up was the idea that there is very little obsidian seen in most of North America. And the reason that that is the case is because obsidian is tied to a very distinct geologic settings with fairly recent volcanism. So in Oregon, we have obsidian that's being found at about 150 geochemically sourced locations. And the ones that we're finding, the obsidian stone tools that we're finding at Rimrock Draw Rockshelter, which is here, are coming from the glass buttes and sources within about 50 miles of the site. And then we have some other points that are being brought in from Whitewater Ridge, which is about 75 miles to the north, Burnt Mountain, which is up in the same general area, Venator, which is over towards the northern end of Steens Mountain. We have Coyote Spring from Nevada, Beatty's Butte from Southern Oregon, Alturas Fine Grain Volcanic from California, Coghlan Buttes, which is in the area associated with Paisley Cave. And then we have Silver Lake Sycan Marsh, which is over on the very western edge of the northern Great Basin in Klamath territory. So the obsidian, geochemical sourcing of obsidian tells a very specific story about where people were coming from, where the primary area of use was for that site. And so it's not common to a lot of other places in North America, but here in Oregon and Northern California, it was used oftentimes as a preferred stone tool type. So just a quick look at the plants that we're getting from the site. So talking about the stone tools, we're talking about the erosion and depositional things that are occurring at the site. Here's some of the plants that we're finding that help fill in the paleoenvironmental context of the site. In general, from top to bottom, we find sagebrush, rabbitbrush, and juniper as fuel woods throughout the deposits. So the environment was different in a lot of ways, but sagebrush steppe has always been a part of the setting or present nearby. So we see it in the deposits associated with fires. But in those fire pits, so that have those same fuel woods, we have those woods, plus we are also finding medicinal and utilitarian plants and food plants that include willow, serviceberry, chokecherry, bitterbrush, bulrush, wapato, wada, which is a tiny black seed, and then some unknown type of hardwood. And those are the things that we've been dating. So bulrush, Wapato and Wada are found primarily in shallow marshy settings associated with quiet water environments, big water, but they're distinct and separate from the stream channel where that rock shelter is located. Here's some pictures of some of the fire hearths that we're finding at the site. This one was right in the rocks, up atop the layer that we had to dig through to get down into the oldest deposits. This is bulrush. We had burned seeds from this little charcoal stained hearth, dating back in the 9500 to 9300 year time range. Here's Wapato seeds were found in this multi-lensed hearth setting that date between, well, right in the 10,000 year time range. And they're sitting right on top of the rock layer from the collapse of the rock shelter wall. And then these are some of the dates that you've already seen, but sagebrush, willow, and bulrush and Wapato dating between 4,500 and about 10,000. So let's talk about that rock layer for a minute. Those botanical dates show that the site was used in that more recent time range with primary deposits in the 7 to 10,000 year to 8,000, 10,000 year range. But when we look under the rock fall, we're going to look back to those locations that I showed you in the map earlier. On the east side, we have Unit 2, and we've also added Unit 30, which is adjacent. Both of those are 2x2s. And then we have 1x2s that are 4 meters separate, units at 18 and 19. The work at Unit 2 was done really early in the process when we were still doing testing. So we were moving fast, getting those rocks out of the way and digging at 10 centimeter levels. In units 18 and 19, we're digging at 5 centimeter levels, and the work went really slow because we're not testing, we're doing data recovery, and we're trying our very best to record everything that we found in C2. So again, here's Unit 2. This is where the camel tooth enamel fragments were being found in particular. This is Unit 30, and then these are Units 18 and 19. So when we were digging in 2012 and we started to hit that rock layer that we were pretty certain had sediments underneath it, the reason that we thought that was because we saw none of the geologic development of clays or orange iron oxide laden sediments that we would expect on perched water atop basalt bedrock. So instead, what we found was aeolian sediments and the beginnings of the marsh clays and rocks that were going from that point downward into the deposits. So we had a guy named Terry Paddock come out and teach us how to split big rocks with wedges and feathers. And we went to work on getting down underneath that rock layer to see if in fact there were buried deposits underneath, and there were. So that red line shows you where all of the rocks are present. You can see the rocks in the sidewalls, some of which were broken out and others that are still hanging in place. And then you can see the students working underneath that rock layer and into those orange stream-borne sands and silts that were very early on in the deposits. This is what the rock layers looked like in Unit 19. So in 2014, we got down into the top of the rock layers at 220 to 225 centimeters. We were excavating through those rocks in 5 centimeter levels. We had to remove all the sediment from around the rocks and record them level by level until we exposed them enough to remove them. Then after we removed them, we had to backtrack and add the material that was underneath those rocks into the level records for that specific level. And we had to photograph, we had to map all of these rocks, and we had to collect all the materials that we could find in situ between these rocks as we worked our way down. So it was a really slow process, and that's why it's been Um, well, it's been 15 years since we really started doing work at the site. So going back to that one again, that's 200 to 225 centimeters. At 265 to 270, we started to break through that rock layer, and you can see the rocks are becoming more tabular, and we have great patches of sediment that are exposed in and around those rocks and underneath them. And then we start picking up stone tools, chipping debris, obsidian, and cryptocrystalline silicate, and tooth enamel fragments. Camel in units 2 and 30, and bison in units 18 and 19. So that rock layer is really important because it's so dense in so many places that it's very hard to envision that there was vertical transport up and down through the deposits going through those rocks, just because they're so latticed in there tightly and protecting the older deposits. So what's underneath that rock layer is the tooth enamel and the dates that we want to talk about the most. So how much material do you need to get an AMS date? This picture that Tom Stafford put together, showing the head of a needle. You all can see that obviously, but the amount of material you really need to pull an AMS date is about the size of a poppy seed. If you're looking at processing material from tooth enamel, you need some pieces that are in bulk form and some pieces that are in powdered form for various parts of the testing process. We're looking at amylogenin and AMS radiocarbon dating. And so this shows the approximate size of the pieces that you need for all of those things, with of course penny for scale. So this is a cross section that Tom prepared looking at a piece of bison tooth enamel. And this shows the cross section of the dentine on the exterior. As you move inward, you get into tabular pyrolusite, magnesium or manganese oxide, and then white tooth enamel where you can pull a date. This on the opposite side, you have that manganese diffusion, you have lenticular manganese dioxide, and then you have exterior tooth enamel. So this shows you how he prepares the cross section to get to the material that has bioapatite that can be radiocarbon dated. This is another piece. This has a less prepared surface. This shows you the mineral latticing of the material in the enamel, and it shows you where you have ferrous staining and manganese staining, and then you have an altered enamel. So we're looking, I'm not, but Tom is looking at these samples and finding places where he can pull the best sample for radiocarbon dating. And the radiocarbon dating has been very good on this material, and because in part it's a basalt setting, there's not much carbonate in the sediments, and if you look at places where you have a lot of carbonate and you do this kind of dating on tooth enamel, you get dates that tend to be much younger. In this case, we have dates that are older. And so let's go back to those dates. Again, these are the ones that are above the rock fall. Under the rock fall, we have started out doing multiple dates on the same samples to make sure that the initial dates were correct. And so these dates that are in black text are the first round of dates, 4 samples that we did on bison tooth and also on camel tooth. And then these 4 dates that are plus or minus are ones that the Sacramento Archaeological Society provided funding for. And those are redates of the original samples, and it shows a difference in the original date of 45 years older, 200 years older, less than 115 years younger. And so you can see that these dates that were initially run are coming back in with the second round of dating within 200 years at maximum from the original. And these are dates that are in the 13,000 to 18,000 year time range. So this first and second rounds of those dates are showing pretty strong results that are consistent and allow us to think about these dates as being real rather than anomalies. After that, we did a date on a second piece of camel tooth and a sizer that came from unit 30. And that date is actually shown right here. That incisor is different from the molar, and that date is in the 18,200 year time range. We did a second piece of bison tooth and got another date in the 17,000 year time range. And then these are dates that we've run for, in the blue text, we've run for specific samples. So the dates are in basically a sequence of 6. There's the plant dates from 2011 to 2016. There's set 1 and set 2 that include the 2018 Camelops and Bison teeth. There's set 3, the Sacramento Archaeology Society dates that confirm the original dates. There's set 4 that are from 2023, and those include another Camelops tooth and a bison tooth. And then there's set 5 that are trench dates for various tests. So now we submitted the first dates in 2018, and those dates came back very strong and came back early. They came back quickly. And so we submitted the next set of dates in 2019 in December. And those dates went into the lab around the very first part of 2020, and then COVID occurred and kept us from getting those dates for up until 2023. So after we got those dates and got confirmation of our originals, we sent in more dates and got similar results from those. So we're getting to the point where we have enough dates and redates on this material that we can actually talk about it in print in peer-reviewed article, but it's taken a long time because of various issues with primarily associated with COVID. So here's what those dates look like. In terms of camelid from units 2 and 30, we have 3 dates of 18,000, 650 to 18,000. In units 2 and 19, we have some bison. We have 5 dates from that location, those locations, and those are all in the 17,000 to 18,000 year time range. But when we look at the dates for units 2 and 30 on Camelops and Bison, we can see that all of those dates are in the 18,000 year time range. And for unit 19 on Bison, we have 4 dates that are all in the 17,000 to close to 18,000 year time range. So these are the ones that I think are really most important, because they show that over on the east side of the rock shelter, we have dates in the 18,000 year time range. Towards the center of the rock shelter, about 4 to 5 meters or so away from these, we have dates in the 17,000 to 18,000 year time range. So we have some temporal separation between those 2 locations, but everything is coming back in the 17,000 to 18,000 year time range. And these are all associated with stone tools and chipping debris. So bison, camel, and archaeological material in the 18,000 to 17,000 year time range. So one of the things that I pointed out early was that chalcedony stone tool, that's multi-edged, kind of a Swiss Army knife object. This was found to have bison blood residue on it. But the thing that's so important about this is that when we first broke through that rock layer in Unit 2, at 265 centimeters below the surface, we got into a very clean lens of volcanic ash that turned out to be from the eruption of Mount St. Helens at 15,300 calendar years ago. 10 centimeters below that, we've got tooth enamel from camel that was radiocarbon dated to 18,300 years and calendar years in age. And 10 centimeters underneath that, we found this flake tool. So in the stratigraphic order of things, if based on the law of superposition, if things are in their natural order, and they have been for some time, then the oldest dates or the oldest material should be deeper and the more recent material is on top. So the suggestion is that this flake tool is older than this 18,300-year-old camel tooth enamel, which is older than this 15,003-year-old 300 years old Mount St. Helens tephra. And that tells us that there is a possibility that this is one of the oldest stone tools that we know of in North America. So here's some of that tooth enamel that from the camel that came from Unit 2. Here's the big piece that we initially dated. Here it is in somebody's hand. I'm going to be honest, I picked a student with a small hand so that this picture would look even more cool and impressive. But still, that is a big piece of herbivore tooth enamel. And then this picture shows camel maxilla from the Juntura Formation over about 80 miles to the east of where the site is. And that camel tooth enamel is shown next to it on the right side. So when you look at the size and the general convolutions of that tooth enamel, it's not horse, it's not bison, it's way bigger than those creatures, and it is most distinctly associated visually with Camelops. Here it is, one of Tom's pictures before it was sampled. This is a piece that was removed for sampling. This is a cross section again of the piece that was sampled for AMS radiocarbon dating. Here's the tooth enamel. This is a Camelops incisor that we found in Unit 30 adjacent to Unit 2. I would like to point out that the root is missing on this. This is just the blade of the tooth right here. And here it is shown next to a bison incisor from a 1,200-pound bull buffalo. And here it is next to a fairly large elk, not nearly the size of the bison or even close to the camel, but that shows you for scale how big these animals were that were being utilized at the site. Here's a camelid tooth enamel in association with the bison tooth enamel, and the dates down at the bottom. So I keep reinforcing that these are from two distinct Pleistocene or ice-aged animals. The camel tooth enamel was found between 263 and 275 centimeters below the surface. The bison tooth enamel was found between 263 and 265 centimeters over in Unit 18 in this case, but also in Unit 19. So in terms of vertical depth and stratigraphic association, these are coming from essentially the same level, but just removed by about 4 meters. Here's some other pictures of the bison enamel. This shows the exterior buccolingual sides, and then this shows the interior of these fragments with the enamel on the outside and the more porous dentin on the inside. We needed to know if the dentin would produce a similar date or if there was a more carbonate absorption in this more porous bone. So we did a test of the dentin in relation to the enamel. And what we found was that the enamel bioapatite was coming back on a piece that was from trench dirt. So this was an unprovenience piece of bone or piece of tooth that we wanted to use. and the enamel came back with a date of 12,225. The bioapatite from the dentin came back with a date of 10,860. So clearly more carbon is getting absorbed into this more porous bone than into this tooth enamel. We also wanted to look at the exterior of tooth enamel and see how if the deposition on the surface was different from the actual tooth enamel itself. And so this is the original surface before Stafford cleaned it. And he tested the surface and got a date of 12,525 on the original surface. Removing the manganese oxide, he got a date of 12,545, or a difference of 20 years on the material that was coated or uncoated. The other thing that we were finding, I told you that there were stone tools and chipping debris found in association with the tooth enamel. And this is from units 18 and 19. These are flake tools that we tested for blood residue. This one came back with evidence of horse blood. This one had bison blood, as did this one. And the green one had mountain sheep blood. So not only do we have tooth enamel from bison and camel, but we also have blood residues from horse. So there's 3 animals that are extinct Ice Age animals represented at the site. And these are directly associated with the tools that were used for processing or butchering those animals. As we look at across from where the tooth enamel was being found in those 2 sets of sites that were the deepest ones that we excavated, or those 2 sets of units that were the deepest ones, we have this tool from unit 2. We have this piece of chalcedony that's got a rind. It looks identical in many respects to this piece, just a little more unevenly shaped. It has a little edged scraper on this end. This from unit 2, this from unit 19. So we have the same tool stone showing up across those units from each other. And then we have morphologically, we have these disc-shaped stone cutting edges and scrapers. This one is a big piece of obsidian that's from the found on the site as natural cobbles, and this is that chalcedony stone tool. This one had evidence of blood residue from bison. This had horse blood on it. And then the latest is basically that we have the dates now that that give us enough ammo to really talk about what the basement age of the site is at Rimrock Draw Rockshelter. We have relationships between toolstone, orange chalcedony across from units 2 and units 18 and 19, where we're finding those tooth enamel fragments. We have large mammal tooth enamel concentrated in a particular layer in both locations. We have blood residues and flake tools showing associations with Ice Age animals. We have bison, horse, blood residues from mountain sheep, and then we have camel represented very well through tooth enamel and the dates on that. And the stratigraphic layers, those packages of stratigraphy that I was showing you early on, are tied together across the rock shelter, so within a few centimeters of each other. So what we can say is not only do we have these old dates on the site, but we also have the stratigraphy that suggests that that material that's in the deepest portion of the rock shelter hasn't been eroded and redeposited as a lag deposit, or those are intact deposits that we're seeing there at that site. So when we talk about those dates, we can also now talk about the stratigraphy. the association of toolstone across the layers and at the same levels. There's a lot of things that we can tie very well together. And those three packages of major sediment that include the stream gravels, the cienega deposits, and then the windblown sediments suggest that there was a big fast-moving channel very early in times at the site. There was a cienega that was very rich with organic material and lots of different kinds of plants and animals, resources in association. And then something happened at about the same time as the eruption of Mount Mazama that killed the entire hydrologic cycle or system of the site. And nothing happened out there but the wind and sediments blowing in from southwest over the top of the rock shelter and depositing in layer after layer of windblown sediment. So there's a lot of consistencies that tell us some important things in the rock shelter and in the paleoenvironmental setting of the rock shelter. So I've gone over all of this already, but I think that it's just really important to look at this site as an important time capsule on early use of the Northern Great Basin towards the transition from the Pleistocene into the Holocene at the earliest years between 18,000 and 17,000 years ago, and extending into the Holocene until about 7,000 years ago when the water went away and the wind started blowing. So there's been a lot of people involved in the work at the site, and most importantly are U of O field school students and other students from around the world. The Oregon Archaeological Society volunteers have contributed tens of thousands of hours of labor to the work that we've done at the site. And then the relationship, the collaboration between the BLM and the University of Oregon has been a huge part of things. We have gotten funding from various groups, including individuals and archaeological clubs like the OAS and the Archaeological Society of Central Oregon, and also the Sacramento Archaeological Society. So a lot of people have come to the site, and a lot of people have taken in what we've been doing there and become part of a much larger community that has allowed us to get all of the work done that we needed to really start putting the site now on the map. So getting the chance to talk to you about the site and before we start into the next and final stages of reporting the results is a great opportunity, and I really appreciate you allowing me to come on and bend your ear for a while. So here's the field school crew from 2021 and their diagnostic stone tool chart that was painted on the side of our utility trailer. And then this is one of the site datums from the mapping that we have done at the location with the help of the Burns and also the state Bureau of Land Management. So the site is on the map, both in terms of archaeology and geophysically. So that's it. I would be happy to wake you all up and answer any questions you might have.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
You didn't mention anything about rock art, and I didn't see where there were any on there, but did you see any on that outcropping?
On the east end of the rock wall, there is a little patch of reddish colored pigment that one of our volunteers noticed years ago. And so we looked at it. It's very diffuse. It's hard to make anything out, but there's a tool that you can use called D-stretch. Have you heard of that, Joe?
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
using D-stretch that pops up as a round almost a round blob of reddish colored material, but it's hard to see. It's very faint visually, but that's the only thing that we can see at the rock shelter that appears to be rock art.
And my other question was, did the glaciers come down and cover that area where the site is?
No, they did not. So
Okay.
the glaciers in general came into about in on the western coastline and interior. The glaciers came down to about the northern third of Washington. I think is about the closest that you can pin down the edge of that.
Unless nobody else has a question, there are something going on in the chat.
Yes, I was going to say there's a few questions in the chat.
Okay. You want to feed those to me so you can control the order?
Sure. From the start, what is the age of the lava cliffs?
They vary. So there is some, those are flows that are associated with Columbia River basalts, the southward expression, or with Steens Mountain basalts that date in the earliest between about 14,000 or 14 and 12 million and extend up to about 8 to 7 million. But there are flows after that because we're in the volcanic uplands. The physiographic province is called the oh boy, I'm having trouble thinking. High lava plains. So it's in the high lava plains, and there's been some volcanism over the course of the Holocene up to 1500 years in Newberry. And so what you see there is in part lava flows, but it's also on the eastern edge of the Brothers Fault Zone. So you have some movement that's associated with faulting along that line that goes from southern Oregon all the way up towards the Portland Basin, close to the Columbia River.
Okay. Next question. How did the ancients handle the volcanic ash at the time of eruption?
Boy, there is a fabulous question for which we don't have an answer. So somewhere in Oregon, closer to the source of the eruption at what's now Crater Lake, there's probably a Mazama Pompeii, the village that is buried under about 40 or 50 feet of volcanic ash. How people responded to it can be told or can be discerned to some degree in the oral traditions of both the Klamath and the Northern Paiute. Both of them mention a period of fire or a period of loud explosions in their stories, but I don't have those handy. So they were mentioned, but how people reacted to them is hard to say, except at this site we know that people stopped coming to that area, maybe not because of the volcanic ash, but because the seismic activity disrupted the hydrologic system.
For that, next question. Thanks for an impressive presentation. And how can we access publications on this site?
Well, that's the next step. As I was explaining in the presentation, we got our first dates back on the tooth enamel. That's been the very best material for radiocarbon dating the oldest deposits at the site. The first dates came back in 2018. We submitted the next round of dates in 2019 and didn't get those back for 4 years because of things that are related to the pandemic. And then we've run 2 more sets of dates after that. So now that we have all of these dates and they're telling us the same story consistently, we're working on an article for publication. So we'll publish the dates first, and we've got a couple of other surprises that we're saving for after those dates. And so you'll start to see a string of articles come out about this work, but it's taken time to build those to a point where we can actually present them with some level of authority.
Okay. Next question here, from Eldart. You mentioned Clovis Diagnostics and Clovis Technology without finding actual Clovis points.
Yeah.
Can you briefly explain what these non-point Clovis diagnostics include and how they differ from the technology used for creating stemmed and other non-Clovis points?
Well, I can't go into a great deal of detail about that, but so first of all, in the Northern Great Basin, we use Clovis as shorthand for a time period that we think may be associated with fluted points in the Northern Great Basin. Fluted points in the Northern Great Basin have never been dated in a good archaeological context. So we don't have dates for those points that are similar to Clovis points elsewhere. Either at Rimrock Draw, at some of the other fluted point sites I've been working at, we haven't been able to pull dates, and neither has anyone else. So the dating of Clovis or fluted points in the Northern Great Basin is questionable. But what we do have is some technology that is associated with fluted points and with also some stem points. That includes overshot flakes. We have two bifaces from Rimrock that look like failed fluted bifaces, and they have fluting scar. Both of them have fluting scars that broke at about midpoint on the material that was being flaked, and they've been converted into convex edge scrapers. So we have some objects that look like fluting flakes. Those have been examined by a variety of people with some understanding of lithic technology. Mike Rondo spent a lot of time up at the site and spent a lot of time looking at some of the artifacts that we're getting from the Northern Great Basin that include fluted points and technology associated with that. But I'd say probably we have those things that are commonly associated with fluted technology or Clovis technology. But probably the strongest evidence we have for anything related to fluting is we have some failed bifaces that have what look like very clear evidence of fluting technology. Just a couple of those. So we see material coming from the site that looks that way, but if we don't have a fluted point that's diagnostic and with the attributes of Clovis, and we don't have the dates, it's all up in the air as far as this site is concerned. So not a very good answer to your question, but we mention it because I want people to be able to look at this stuff that we're finding that is, has some of those attributes and help draw conclusions on that.
Okay. Short one, any coprolites?
No copra. There's one of the things that makes this site different from the places where you find coprolites is the fact that it is just more of a windbreak than a rock shelter. So it has a lot of the characteristics of an open site in terms of repeated wetting and drying, and generally poor preservation of any organic materials except tooth enamel, which is why we focused on that so intensively. We do have some bones that appear to be those of bison, and in the back of the rock shelter, we have an area where there has been pooling of not pooling, but there's been a perching of water on top of bedrock that has kept those deposits moist over time. We have wood fragments from fires. We have animal hairs and what appear to be human hairs. We have thousands and thousands of pieces of rodent and rabbit bone and some bird bone that are concentrated back there. But something like basketry or something as friable or delicate as a human or other coprolite is just not going to preserve in that setting no matter what.
Dennis here with a question. Pat, assuming you can hear me, what is your next project and how can SAS and others help?
My next project is to get those work done on those hairs. So we know that the animal hairs and human hairs have the potential to be radiocarbon dated and genetically identified. And I would really like to know if some of the hairs that we're getting back there in the really deep and damp deposits are those of Pleistocene animals. So it's a really odd setting back there. We don't get a lot of those things that you do in another dry rock shelter, but we do get some things that have been preserved there because of the damp conditions. And so I think those hairs are a way to look at the environment in a whole new way that we haven't been able to touch yet.
Well, please keep us in mind when you're working toward that end.
Okay. I would, yeah, I would love to. Thank you.
Okay. See, two more in the chat. Did you find any diagnostic points in the stratum with the Pleistocene fauna below the rocks?
Great questions. We have not found a single diagnostic point in association with those animal bones, those tooth enamel fragments. So we found lots of chipping debris. We found lots of flake tools, or not lots, but we found a fair number of flake tools. We found some biface fragments, but I'm pretty conservative when it comes to calling a stone tool a diagnostic tool, and I can't say that we have anything diagnostic from down there. Unfortunately, we have a place in 2023, I had a 6-week field school out at the site, and we removed all the sandbags from the excavation units, and it was after a really wet spring. And so in the back of the rock shelter where we had planned to do work on unit 30, beginning under where we found that camel incisor that we radiocarbon dated, in the next level down was where we were going to begin our work. And there was 1.5 feet of water in that portion of the excavation unit. And so we got the sandbags out and we pumped the water out multiple times, but it kept recharging. And we finally got the water to recede. But because those sediments back there are such a dense clay material, we had to wait for the sediment to dry, because if we would have stepped down into that clay, you would have taken an entire level and an excavation level off on the bottoms of your boots. So what happened was we had a 6-week field school and we couldn't start excavating until the 5th week. So we're hoping to go back and excavate in that area, because in unit 2 next door we found that big piece of camel molar that we got the first 18,000 year radiocarbon date on, and underneath that is where we found that orange chalcedony stone tool. So we know that in unit 30 we have a really good shot at finding something underneath the camel incisor there, but we were not able to dig down in a responsible fashion and protect the sediments and get very far at all during the 2023 field work. So we're kind of changing strategies, and I'm hoping to come back and do that work with a group of professionals instead of a field school, and work that area very carefully and excavate about 20 to 25 more centimeters there and hopefully find stone tools underneath there and perhaps something diagnostic. That's a real long path to the answer that you wanted, but that's the nature of field work sometimes.
Part of the fun.
Yeah. That was so frustrating. God, it was just like, this was the year that we were going to finish 2023 and put the site to bed and put those sandbags in and cover it with a layer of dense, 3/4 to 1.5 inch gravel, and just cap that site and protect it for the next generation of archaeologists to come back and work there. But because of the standing water in there, we just couldn't get a thing done.
You can laugh or you can cry.
Yeah.
I think there's one last question on the chat.
One last question here. Will the publications address the fact that the people at this site were in touch with other people in many different directions at a significant distance from Rimrock Draw?
Wow, great question. The first publication won't, simply because it's got to be short and to the point based on those dates. We have to get those dates out there so that people can start asking the kinds of questions they want to about the site. People have been hearing about this site for years, and it's like, what is O'Grady doing out there? All this talk about this Rimrock Draw, blah blah blah. But where are the dates? Where's the scientific proof? So we have to focus on getting the basic nuts and bolts of the site out in front of the scientific community, and that's just absolutely the first thing that has to happen. But when we come back and do additional work on the monograph to report the site in greater depth for a larger community, then yes, we're definitely going to talk about long range networks. We're going to have tribal people talk about their perspective on the site and what people were doing there. There's just a lot of different ways that we need to look at this site from multiple perspectives and put it on the map for everybody. So the Obsidian source information is fascinating. It's always been an obsession of mine, just because you can tell so much about how people, human behavior over both short and long range trade networks and travel networks, and all of those sorts of questions can be approached. So that's one really good way to get at that. But the other way is just to look at what tribal people have to say about those things, and also what the ethnographic record has to say, and report both of those.
Well,
Okay,
thank you, everybody. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, off to you, Joe.
Thank you, everybody. Dr. Grady, going to be sending you a certificate of appreciation for tonight's talk.
Oh, thank you.
I'll get that out to you. And also, I want to announce next month on June 13th, we're having Dr. Gregory Haynes. Topic of his talk is going to be current research directions for prehistoric ceramics and the Southern California desert. That's going to be on June 13th.
Joe, if I may, this is Dennis. Let me put in an advertisement for the Sacramento Archaeological Society, of which I've been a member for some time. It was a scholarship that we put together to go up and work with Pat on his research. And it was at the time that this lady was working there, and they dug underneath the ash layer and found an artifact there. And we've been supporting Pat ever since, as has this the Archaeological Conservancy. And from my perspective, I want to make sure we're supporting research everywhere in the future that puts us back in time as to how far we've actually gone back. And Rimrock is just half, I don't know, it's 10% of the way back. of how far we're going to end up going. Thank you.
That's
Thank you,
great.
Dennis. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight for this meeting. Appreciate it. Hope you guys can come back and join us for a future talk. And you're welcome to join the group too.
Joe, thank you.
cas.org.
Joe, Dennis, again, thank you so much for putting this together, inviting our group, because I've been fussing at it for a long time because I haven't heard from him since I was there some of the early days of the thing. And to see what he's accomplished and so on and so forth, it just blows my proverbial mind away. So Joe, thank you very much for inviting the Sacramento Archaeological Society, and I encourage you to become a member if you haven't already, so we can share our future stuff with you as well. Thank you.
That sounds great. We'll be in touch. I'll give you a holler. Thank you, everybody. Have a safe drive home. And
right.
hopefully we'll see you next month.
Thank you for having me.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye, everybody.